But this only made my relationship with the girls worse.
How stupid do you have to be to get pregnant like this? Don't you think that you're a bit old to have children?
Old? I'm only 32. And both your father and I have wanted this for some time.
Yeah, well, neither of us want this, so maybe you should consider getting an abortion. Our father doesn't need more children draining his bank account.
Hi, my name is Carol, and growing up, I had always wanted to have a big family with lots of children. I just loved the idea of watching them grow and discover the world around them. However, my dream quickly became a nightmare when I became a stepmother for some of the worst-behaved teenage girls that I had ever met. It all started when I became serious about finding someone to settle down with and used online dating as a way to meet someone. I had gone on a few dates with some very unusual people, but then I met Michael. He was so incredibly handsome, and very clearly had his life together. The only drawbacks were that he was divorced and had 2 teenage daughters, but I honestly didn't see these as drawbacks at all. Apparently, he had gotten married to his ex-wife soon after high school, and they had twin daughters right away. But years later, they realized that they weren't a good fit for one another, and so they got a divorce but shared custody of the girls. I knew that coming into the relationship would be a challenge, but I was prepared to make it work, as I loved the idea of helping to raise 2 young women. Their names were Jasmine and Candace, and at first they just seemed very shy, but they quickly became very catty and treated me like an interloper.
I can't believe our father would marry such a trashy bitch like you.
Yeah, like why couldn't he just find someone who wasn't a gold digger? Why don't you just divorce him so that he can find someone better?
They would never say such things when Michael was present. Instead, they kept their bullying of me a secret. At the time, I didn't want to rock the boat, and so I didn't tell Michael anything, and I just assumed that the girls would eventually come around, but they never did. I would try to get them to join me for spa dates, or trips to the mall, or even go antiquing, but they just ignored me. It hurt, of course, to feel rejected by them, especially since I was trying so hard to win them over. I knew that I could never replace their mother, and I didn't want to, but I did want them to also grow to love me over time. After a couple years, though, things got both worse and better. I found out that I had become pregnant, and both Michael and I were overjoyed at the news, but this only made my relationship with the girls worse.
How stupid do you have to be to get pregnant like this? Don't you think that you're a bit old to have children?
Old? I'm only 32, and both your father and I have wanted this for some time.
Yeah, well, neither of us want this, so maybe you should consider getting an abortion. Our father doesn't need more children draining his bank account.
That made no sense, of course, as both Michael and I were working and making good money. We weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination, but we were doing okay for ourselves. In the weeks that followed, though, the girls would constantly say vile things to me and would do their best to make me feel unwanted. Just as before, I didn't tell Michael anything about what was going on. That is until I overheard the girls speaking with their mother on the phone.
Sorry, Mom, but it isn't working. She's just ignoring us.
Well then, you need to try harder. Otherwise, we'll need to resort to something a bit more drastic.
But Mom, what does that even mean?
Just let me worry about that. For now, keep at it. If we want to get that bitch out of our house and get me back into it, then you two need to smarten up. Stop being nice to her and get her to leave.
It all made perfect sense now. The reason that the girls were being so mean was because they were being manipulated by their mother into seeing me as the enemy, although I would never have guessed that the reason for it was that she wanted my husband back. I still didn't know if I should say anything to him. After all, I had no proof, and I knew that neither the girls or Michael's ex-wife would admit to what they were up to. But then, suddenly the girls started acting differently. At first, I was shocked and didn't know how to process what was going on, and I was highly suspicious of it.
Oh, Carol, your feet must hurt. Someone who is pregnant like you shouldn't be doing the dishes. Here, let me do them for you.
Yeah, why don't you go and sit down for a bit, and I'll make you a tea.
Alarm bells were going off in my head, and I knew that I couldn't trust them, but I played along so that I could see exactly what game they were playing. Shortly after I sat down and stretched out, Jasmine came into the room holding a cup of tea, and she had a really frightened expression on her face. Is that for me?
Yes, but well...
Is everything all right, Jasmine? Listen, I know things between us haven't always been great, but I want you to know that you can always come to me if you need to talk about something. Believe it or not, but I love you and your sister just as much as I love your father, and I haven't given up hope of us being a family. I could see Jasmine battling with her thoughts as she held the cup of tea, and then suddenly she placed it on a table far out of my reach.
But what if I almost did something terrible? Like really, really terrible?
Then we would find a way to work through it. As a family.
Well, then I can't give you this tea. My mother told me to put something in it that would make you miscarry, and I just can't give it to you. I don't care what she says. You aren't a bad person.
I see. For now, it would be best if you told her that I did drink it, but that it didn't work. There's no sense in making her think you betrayed her. We'll have to have a talk with your father about this and come up with a solution, though. She is your mother, and it's unfair that you should be stuck in such a terrible position. Just then, Candace rushed into the room with tears streaming down her cheeks. I could see the relief on her face, though, when she saw that I hadn't drank the tea.
Oh, thank God that you didn't drink it.
No, I couldn't go through with it.
Listen, you two, we need to speak with your father and figure something out. That night, the three of us approached Michael and told him what his ex-wife had attempted to force his daughters to do. He was at first enraged at them, but I managed to calm him down. After all, they had been fooled by their mother, but they had chosen to not go through with her evil plan. Shortly after that, we contacted Michael's lawyer, and he applied to have a restraining order placed on his ex-wife to keep her away from us. As a result, we had cameras installed around the outside of our home and in the garage. Weeks later, they proved incredibly valuable as we caught Michael's ex-wife enter our garage and cut the brakes on my car. Neither Michael nor I could believe what we had caught her doing. Not only was she guilty of breaking the restraining order we had against her, but now she was attempting to murder me as well. We turned the video over to the police and pressed charges against her. Not long afterwards, she was arrested, and during the trial, both Jasmine and Candace confessed to what their mother had tried to get them to do. In the end, she was charged with attempted murder, breaking the conditions of the restraining order, and the delinquency of minors. The last one made the judge that presided over the case upset the most, and as such sentenced her to 10 years in prison. It hardly felt fair that she would only serve 10 years in prison, but it allowed Michael's lawyer the ability to get us full custody of the girls. Once the trial was all settled, the four of us moved away and started fresh in a new town and at a new school for the girls. We knew that if we hadn't, that the girls would have been harassed at their school over what they had almost done, and we wanted to give them the best chance at success. In the end, it was the best thing for us, as we were able to have a fresh start. It took years, but we did eventually grow closer, and I'm happy to say that Jasmine, Candace, and I have grown incredibly close, and they have grown to call me their mother. Not only that, but after I gave birth to twin boys, the two of them took to the roles of loving and caring older sisters quite well, and I am very happy to say that we are a very happy family now. As for Michael's ex-wife, well, one day she will be released from prison, but will have no family anymore as both Jasmine and Candace have sworn that they refuse to ever speak with her ever again. She is looking at a very lonely and desolate future and has no one to blame but herself. The last I heard about Michael's ex-wife was because the police had contacted us because she'd tried to escape prison. Thankfully, she hadn't succeeded, but they thought we might want to know that it would add to her prison sentence, and that now she really would spend the rest of her life in prison. During her escape attempt, she'd almost had an accident that left her with a lot of missing teeth and couple broken bones. Once she healed in the hospital, she'd be back in prison for life, this time with significantly less teeth. Please subscribe to the channel.
God, why did they have to stop segregation? Mr. Smith, the answer is dp over dt equals 200. Well, it seems you are correct, but black kids don't have any bit of brain in their heads.
Hey, I'm Aurora, and this is the story of how I was able to help one of my closest friends get revenge on our racist and creepy teacher. It's quite an interesting story, really, and I'm happy to share it with you all. So, I first met Jalen when I was a sophomore, but he'd just started high school. About half of the school year had ended and he'd just transferred in from another school. My first impression was that Jalen was a pretty quiet kid, and he was very lonely, so I decided to go up to him and start a conversation. Hey, I'm Aurora. What's your name?
I'm Jalen. Can I ask you how I can get to my next class?
Sure. I'll even walk you if you like. He was a very nice kid, and soon enough, we traded numbers and even worked on some homework assignments together. Because Jalen was incredibly smart, he was ahead of his grade and was in my math class, which was calculus. He also just treated everybody with kindness, and I think that's what gained everybody, including the teachers' respect. But when the next year started, everything changed. Jalen and I found out that we were in the same class, which was awesome. The downside was that the teacher was the most horrid man you could ever meet. I've got a lot to say about him, so hang in there. This man's name was Mr. Smith, and he was just not a pleasant man in general. First of all, his classwork was just insanely difficult, and only the smartest of the smartest kids in the class could just barely pass with an A. He was incompetent when it came to communication with the students as well. Overall, people did not like him, but they had no choice but to act like they at least tolerated his existence, since the teachers were oblivious to his personality. I'd heard about Mr. Smith from his former students, but nothing could ever prepare me and Jalen for what we were going to experience. Right as the school year started, Mr. Smith told Jalen to sit at a desk in the far back of the room, which was already weird. Jalen and I shot glances at each other when Mr. Smith did this for the only other dark-skinned student as well. He then started to seat us in a very abnormal pattern. The white kids were in the front, with Asians and Latino students in the middle of the class. However, Mr. Smith put me in the front of the class. But I was Asian. Okay, strange. I decided to not dwell too much on this seating arrangement and see how Mr. Smith was going to teach first. And boy, was the first experience insane.
I'm Mr. Smith. We are jumping right into our first lesson. Mr. Smith, I think you're on Unit 3? Too bad. You keep talking when I'm trying to teach. I'm glad I put the bad kid in the back. I knew you'd be up to no good. But the other kids are welcome to ask questions.
I was completely flabbergasted. Did this teacher really have the audacity to call Jalen a bad student because of confusion? And the way he decided to skip the most crucial parts of the course was crazy. For the rest of the period, the kids asked him questions while he answered them nicely, but completely ignored Jalen and the other girl, Michaela, who tried so many times to even get his attention. And after his entire lesson, in which half the class got lost on, he gave us a pop quiz. We got our results immediately, and to my surprise, I failed miserably. This wasn't possible. I'd been trying my best to pay attention the whole time. I began asking the class around. Every student in the class got low D's or C's, while Jalen and Michaela had low F's. I reviewed my answers with other students, and despite getting almost the same answers as them, I got a lower grade than them. Jalen's answers were mostly all correct, but the mark said that he'd failed. This just didn't add up. The next day, Michaela immediately transferred out of the class, which was good for her. Unfortunately, the school didn't let Jalen do the same for whatever reason. Mr. Smith just got worse and worse as the year went on. Mr. Smith would blatantly say that he didn't like the way Jalen talked or looked at him. The teacher would also comment on how Jalen probably cheated his way into the class, because apparently, kids like him weren't capable of having a higher IQ. It's stupid reasoning, honestly.
Kids that look like you are always stupid. You can always tell from the skin. Shut up and sit down before I give you a referral.
Now, wasn't this just insane? Mr. Smith continued to give other kids passing grades while Jalen and I's grades suffered. But while Mr. Smith berated Jalen constantly, he seemed to have nothing against me. One day, I decided to talk to my teacher and ask him what was going on. Mr. Smith, can I ask you why I got a 25% on this assignment? I triple-checked and my answers were correct.
Well, you seem like a very nice girl. I'll see if I can change your grade.
And what about Jalen? He got a perfect score as well, but you gave him a 0.
Who cares about Jalen? You and I both know that black kids like him don't make it anywhere in life. You're a pretty little girl. Keep away from that boy. He will just ruin you. I'll change your grade for you just because you're special and so beautiful. Don't tell anybody.
Well, that definitely sounded threatening. This just kept going and going and going as the days rolled by. My grades were changed, but Mr. Smith also started acting a little weirder towards me, but more racist towards Jalen.
Jalen, I told you to stop talking right this instant. Sir, that was Mike, not me. Mike is a good kid. This behavior is only going to get you into prison later on. You've probably already been in juvenile hall a few times. God, why did they have to stop segregation? Mr. Smith, the answer is dp over dt equals 200. Well, it seems you are correct, but black kids don't have any bit of brain in their heads. I'm issuing you a detention from cheating off my other students.
Oh, hell nah. This was getting too far. And why didn't any other student try and speak up for Jalen? Jalen and I decided to confront Mr. Smith right after class. When the bell rang, the other students quickly got up and left while Jalen and I waited. I got up and walked to Mr. Smith's desk. Mr. Smith, I think treating Jalen like trash and underestimating his abilities is a really scummy move, especially since you're a teacher and Jalen is one of your students.
Sir, I'm sorry if you feel any sort of discomfort towards me, but I am simply trying to learn like everybody else. How dare you think it is right to talk to me? Don't you get it? I see you as nothing. You will be nothing. You will do nothing. You will eat nothing. You will make nothing. Why would I waste my time on someone that I know is going to fail in life anyway? Get out before I call in security. But Aurora, wait.
Jalen quickly left the room in anger. I was very confused, but I obeyed. I was still fuming from everything that the math teacher had said to my friend, and I was just about ready to punch him square in the face. Maybe I could go talk to a counselor instead to sort out this situation.
How many times have I told you not to stand up for that black kid? He's only going to drag you down. Maybe I'll have to punish a naughty girl like you. You'd like that, huh?
What the hell? I immediately felt weirded out and made some lame excuse before leaving. I knew that Jalen and I had to take this into our own hands. So not only was Mr. Smith an ignorant and racist being, but he was also a creep. I went over to his house and we started thinking of a plan. What should we do?
I'm not sure at all. Wait.
I watched curiously as Jalen ran out of the room, coming back a minute later with a pen and a tiny phone. How's this gonna help?
Well, this pen actually has a microphone inside it, and I can easily hide the phone so that I won't get caught. I can videotape, and maybe you can have the pen so the microphone can pick his insults up better.
Sounds good. Where do you even find a microphone pen?
I have my ways.
We had our plan ready, and we were definitely going to get our evidence. Better sooner than later. The next day, we walked into class and waited for it to start. I turned on the pen Jalen gave me, and he started the camera. Mr. Smith walked in and almost immediately started throwing his insults.
Mr. Jalen, the color of your skin really infuriates me sometimes. But you might be a little lucky today. I'm going to be pounding on the whole class for yesterday's quiz results.
Although Mr. Smith claimed that he was going to bully the whole class today, he quickly switched back to harassing Jalen again.
Jalen, how does a black kid get 85% on a math test? Haven't I warned you enough not to cheat? They should make physical punishments legal again. That way, I could teach you a lesson like how they taught your ancestors. What? Mr. Smith, that's a really unconventional thing to say. You need to stop racially profiling me and being racist. All I'm trying to do is just learn. Oh my goodness! Now the minority comes crying and blaming somebody else for their own faults. I know damn well you cheat, but you play the victim card so you could get me in trouble.
Mr. Smith.
Why don't you get on the football team and do something useful with yourself rather than trying to be something you're not? Stupid kid. Shut up before I send you to the counselors again.
Obviously, Jalen and I were absolutely fuming. For the rest of the class, I recorded a few more of our teacher's very bold statements. And as soon as class ended, the two of us ran out to the front office. We plugged in the phone and microphone to the secretary's computer, showing her that we needed to see the principal immediately. She let us go in since the principal was available at the moment. We walked in with the evidence and explained to Principal Lacey everything that Mr. Smith had done. She appeared a little shocked at first, but upon seeing the video and hearing what he said, she was just as mad by the end of our story. Principal Lacey signed us out of school early and allowed us to just leave, which was nice. She promised that she'd help do something about it. The next day, Jalen and I walked slowly to math class. We were afraid of what we'd see. To our surprise, a notice on the door stated that Mr. Smith would be out of the office for a few weeks for emergency reasons. We looked at each other. Was he finally going to get kicked from the school? We soon heard around that Principal Lacey had walked straight into Mr. Smith's next class and begun playing the video in front of the whole class. Mr. Smith turned totally red and panicked while trying to explain himself. One of the students even recorded the situation, and what happened was exactly what the rumor was. It was hilarious. Mr. Smith ended up getting fired with his teaching license revoked. I also told people about his creepy behavior towards me, and other students also spoke about him being creepy towards them. Nothing was done about this situation, but because everybody knew what a terrible person he was, many parents protested him about even living in our city. We ended up getting a new teacher, and he was the best person ever. He was compassionate to the whole class and helped us get good grades. He even specially helped Jalen get A's on the grades that Mr. Smith had messed up purposefully. Mr. Smith ended up moving to a small town to try and at least tutor kids, but the rumor spread around so much that he ended up jobless. We heard the wife was so pissed and divorced him, taking along their 5-year-old son. Mr. Smith now is depressed and jobless. Jalen and I have gotten closer than ever, and this year, we are applying for college. Sophomore year was a crazy journey, but we made it through with some happy outcomes. Thanks for listening to my story, and what do you think? That is, until the priest asked a question.
Should anyone here know of any reason that this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace.
I have something to get off my chest.
I didn't have to look to know that it was Jack's mother speaking up. Her mouth formed in a thin line as she clutched her purse to her chest and approached Jack and I.
I refuse to allow my son to marry an unfaithful woman.
Hi, my name is Selena. I'm 28 years old. I work as a technical writer, and I'm marrying the man of my dreams. His name is Jack. He's kind, funny, smart, and he's wonderful with my daughter, Sabrina. It's been difficult for Sabrina, growing up without a father, and it took her over a year before she could even speak to Jack. But over time, they've bonded and become closer than ever. It warms my heart every time I see him reading her a bedtime story or putting on an impromptu puppet show with her stuffed animals. Jack and I have been engaged for over a year now, and we have made little progress in planning our wedding. Truthfully, we've both been so busy with work and taking care of Sabrina that we simply don't have the time to prepare everything needed for the ceremony. But at least we've been able to mark a date and write out most of our wedding invitations. Though I noticed when we were writing them out that my husband had a troubled look on his face. What's wrong?
I'm not sure if I should invite my mother or not.
I froze and swallowed down the lump forming in my throat. Jack's mother, Dorothy, had never been a fan of mine, even less so of my daughter. I remembered the first time Jack ever introduced me to his parents. His father was calm and unreadable, but his mother frowned at me the moment she saw me. She didn't approve of the fact that I was a single mother, and she didn't see me as a fit for her son. I could take the snide remarks Jack's mother made against me, but when she made a remark about my daughter growing up to be a degenerate without a father figure, I screamed at her. She kicked me and Jack out, and I cried the entire way home. Jack never spoke to her again. But now, with our wedding plans beginning to take root, it was time to decide whether or not she deserved a second chance. My mother always told me that second chances should be free, but they should also be final. I'm willing to give her that. But if she verbally attacks my daughter again, I won't have anything to do with her. Ever again.
I'd hate not to have my own mother at my wedding. Thank you for understanding, hun.
I nodded, though I couldn't shake my nerves. I was certain Jack's mother would try something again, but I decided to reserve judgment until the wedding day. The days turned to weeks, which turned to months. Finally, our wedding day was set. Everything was prepared. My stepmother was standing behind me as I gazed upon my crystalline patterned wedding dress in the mirror of a small office room in the old church we were to be married in. My stepmother, Christy, had tears in her eyes.
Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you, of the woman you've become.
Thanks, Christy. My stepmother and I embraced for a long time, and I had to hold back tears as to not mess up my carefully applied makeup. But once we finally parted, the time had come to walk down the aisle with my father, Darren. But not before my beautiful Sabrina skipped down the aisle, scattering flower petals as she went, wearing her beautiful pink dress that Jack helped me pick out for her. I'm nervous.
You're ready. You've been ready since the day you brought Jack to us.
Thanks, Dad. My father took my arm and we walked down the aisle, slowly passing friends, family, and co-workers. A few of my friends were in tears already, dabbing their eyes with tissues, while others recorded with their phones. I felt like my own celebrity. But amongst the smiling faces and teary-eyed expression, I spotted one face in the crowd frowning at me. Jack's mother. She'd aged over the years, but I remembered that expression. That same expression Jack had brought me to that day he introduced me to his parents. His father was focused on Jack, his eyes gleaming but not spilling with tears. But I remembered that I'd given his mother a second chance, and so I decided she could look at me as sternly as she wanted as long as she left my daughter alone. So, I looked away and focused on Jack ahead of me. His smile was warm, his suit fitting his muscular frame perfectly. His eyes shined brighter than I'd ever seen before. When my father reached Jack, he let go of my arm, symbolically and literally giving me to Jack. And I stepped forward, facing Jack as the priest cleared his throat and began the ceremony. When he finished introductions, Jack and I read our vows to each other. We laughed. I almost cried more than once, and we laughed some more. The day seemed perfect. Jack's mother's frowning face disappeared from my memory, and I didn't even bother looking her way. That is, until the priest asked a question.
Should anyone here know of any reason that this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace.
I have something to get off my chest.
I didn't have to look to know that it was Jack's mother speaking up. Her mouth formed in a thin line as she clutched her purse to her chest and approached Jack and I.
I refuse to allow my son to marry an unfaithful woman.
Gasps sounded from the crowd and I shook my head. What are you talking about?
Mom, stop.
This woman was a single mother before she even met my Jack. She couldn't keep her legs closed for some strange man who ran away from both of them. I cannot allow my son to father an illegitimate child. I will not.
No, not on my wedding day, you old crone. Sit back in your seat before I make you.
Make me? Do not speak to me like I am your child. Lord knows you've done a terrible enough job with her.
Fiery rage prickled down my spine. I clenched my fists and acted without thinking. Before I knew it, my hand had found the wedding cake standing tall a few feet away from me. Listen here, you witch. I grabbed a fistful of cake. Why don't you eat some cake? I shoved the handful of cake right in her face. And sit your wrinkled butt back down in your seat. Jack's mother sputtered and coughed, panicking as she wiped cake from her face.
Oh, you ruined my dress, you harlot. Oh, but I did.
Selena, what are you doing?
What I should have done long ago. Something moist and soft splashed into my face, and I gasped. Bits of cake were falling from my face and dirtying my perfect wedding dress. You didn't! Jack's mom stood there with cake in her hand. In a fit of rage, I knocked the entire cake over, all over Jack's mom. She screamed and fell over, cake covering her from head to toe. Jack glared at me, and Sabrina started crying, so I grabbed her by the hand and led her to my father, who seemed to be trying his best not to laugh, then ran to my dressing room. I sat down and tried to wipe the cake off my dress, fighting back tears. But it didn't matter, did it? My dress was already ruined. What difference did it make if my makeup was ruined as well? So, I cried. No, I bawled my eyes out. My wedding day had been taken apart by that awful lady. But at least I had gotten my revenge. If only my mother could have seen me up there. She would have been proud. I sat in that quiet room for hours, crying and staring out the window as the guests eventually left. When I couldn't stand watching them anymore, I stared at the mirror, at my destroyed makeup and cake-smattered dress. I could have cried more right there, but the tears had dried up, so I just stared and mourned what could have been. Then a knock came at my door. Who is it? I hoped it wasn't Jack or Sabrina. I couldn't stand to let them see me like this. If only my mother were still here. After losing her to cancer years ago, I have never been quite the same. The door creaked open, and in the mirror, I saw Jack's mother step through the door. For the first time, I didn't spot a frown or an angry expression on her face. The rage, instead, was on my face. I whirled around and puffed my chest out, prepared to stand my ground again. What do you want? Jack's mother wrung her hands and avoided eye contact, staring at the ground for a long moment.
Apologize. It's complicated, Selena. It's so complicated.
Dorothy took a seat at the chair by the window, her face still peppered with cake crumbles and frosting, as well as her dress.
I had no idea that your previous husband had passed away.
I had thought my tears had run dry, but the moment the words left her mouth, tears welled in my eyes. I sniffled. That's because I never got the chance to tell you, because you never gave me the chance.
You're right. I'm just so embarrassed by how I've been acting all this time.
Well, you should be.
You have to understand, Jack means everything to me. He's always been such a sensitive soul. I was under the impression that you had left your husband, or maybe he had left you. I was scared that you were bad news, that you would end up separating with Jack. He can't take that kind of heartbreak, especially if there's a child involved. I was just trying to protect him.
You had no right to say the things you did about my daughter.
I know. I was angry and blinded. I'm not here to ask your forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I'm here because I owe you an apology, and I couldn't bear to leave this church until I delivered it.
Well, thank you for the apology, but that doesn't mean I'm ready to forgive you. Not yet. What made you want to apologize? Was it really just finding out about my husband?
Jack was the one that told me. I've made him angry throughout his life, but I've never seen him like this. He really does seem to care about you, in a way I've never seen him care about anyone. And as I said, I don't want him to get hurt, but I think if I continue to interfere in the love you two seem to share with each other, I will be the one hurting him instead. I'm just ashamed it took me so long to realize. I hope that perhaps one day I can earn another chance to be your mother-in-law, in more than just name.
I don't think that will ever happen. My second chances are final, I'm afraid.
I understand.
Over the next few days, I saw more of Jack's mother. He seemed intent on having us all spend time together. Though he didn't say it out loud, I knew he wanted me to give her another chance. But I had already drawn my line in the sand, and she had crossed it. But then weeks passed, then months, then a couple of years. Jack and I had a redo of our wedding, and it went perfectly in every way I could have dreamed of. And this time, Jack's mother had a smile on her face, directed right at me. She went to every event my daughter had at school, every play, every recital, every achievement, and she cheered her on the loudest sometime. I had always seen my mother's words as wise. It made sense to me to give a second chance, and no other. But the more I see change in Jack's mother, the more I find myself laughing with her, smiling at her, even giving a compliment or two. Maybe a third chance isn't so bad of a thing to give. Maybe my mother was wrong after all. I never told Jack's mother that I forgive her, but in a way, I think I have. And I think she knows it. And honestly, I think I'm okay with that. I'm proud of the change Jack's mother has made, and I'm not afraid to say that I can see her becoming my mother-in-law in more than just name. Eventually, of course. Thanks for watching.
I had only just sat back down for 1 minute when she burst back into the room and marched to the front, knocking over a photo of my grandmother, and not even pausing when it smashed on the ground. Everyone stared, open-mouthed at my boss, and I felt as though I were going to be sick. What are you doing?
You won't come to work because of the funeral, so I'll make sure there is no funeral until you leave.
My name is Joseph, and 2 weeks ago, my grandmother passed away. She was a huge influence in my life, and I was grieving heavily. I told my boss right away that I would need time for the funeral. Please, ma'am, my grandmother has just died. I will need some time off for the funeral. Is that okay? I'm giving you more notice than the policy says. My boss seemed okay at the time.
Of course, Joseph. I'm so sorry to hear about your grandma. You're our best employee. Take the day off, and here, have a gift card for our store as a token of my condolences. This is a hard time. If you need anything, just call.
My entire workforce had a tumultuous relationship with our boss. She was notorious for her mood swings. So hearing her give an immediate affirmative was such a relief. I spent the next 2 weeks working harder than ever, just to prove that I wasn't going to let them down after I was shown such kindness. The night before the funeral, I hung up my apron, nodded to my co-workers, and left. My boss didn't acknowledge me, and I didn't think anything of it. The next day, I got dressed in black and met my family at my grandmother's house. It was almost like she had never left. I could still smell her perfume, and her favorite hard candy was piled high in the bowl in the center of the coffee table. Her cat, a gray British Shorthair, mewled from her perch on top of the cabinet.
I'm so glad we're all here together today.
Yeah, it's such a shame that it takes something like this to bring us all together. Let's organize a night a month at the very least, where we all make an effort to meet up. How about that? That sounds lovely. In my pocket, I could feel my phone vibrating. I quickly silenced it and didn't think anything of it. Everyone who knew me knew I was at a funeral today, so it must have been a spam call. The cars rolled up outside the house, and just as I was climbing into the car, my phone started to ring again. I silenced it once again, but I was starting to get a bad feeling. Who could be ringing me so insistently? By the fourth time, my phone was ringing. My sister and my aunt were looking at my pocket nervously. When we got out of the car at the church, my sister pulled me aside.
You should just turn your phone off.
Yeah, you're right. I'll do that now. Just as I took my phone out to turn it off, I got another call. It was my boss. Hello?
Joseph, what the hell? Where are you?
I suddenly felt cold all over. What was my boss doing? She knew I was at a funeral. I'm at my grandma's funeral. I told you this.
Did you ask for time off?
Yes. You said you understood.
I said no such thing. You need to get to work right now.
You told me 2 weeks ago that I could have the day off. I gave you plenty of notice.
Do you have my agreement in writing?
My family were giving me weird looks, and everyone who had been standing around on the lawn were moving towards the church doors. No, I don't. Listen, I'm sorry, but I have to go into the funeral now. I hung up on her shouting and turned my phone off. I instantly knew that I was going to be in trouble at work the next day, assuming I still had a job. The idea of losing my job over this made me begin to panic.
Joseph, darling, the service is about to start. Come on.
I didn't have a choice to sit it out, nor did I want to. But most importantly, I had to set boundaries. I knew I had asked. I knew she had said yes. And so I knew that by leaving my grandmother's funeral to attend work would be letting her win. And this was not something she should have been fighting me on. So I went inside, sat down next to my mother and sister, and I mourned my grandmother's death and celebrated her life. Mary McDonald was a gracious woman. She was an active member of her church and community, and a doting parent to her 3 children. As a grandmother, she was unrivaled in her grandchildren's eyes. Mary left her mark on the world. Today, though we are saying goodbye to someone we dearly loved, to Mary McDonald, we share this song. The priest lifted his hymn book, and we all copied. Just as the pianist struck the first key, the doors at the back opened with an explosive slam, and everyone shifted in their seats, exclaiming in surprise over the intrusion. I turned around too, and gasped. It was my boss. She had on her work uniform, setting her quite apart from everyone else in the room who were wearing black. Her beady black eyes scanned the room, searching for me. I slid down in my seat, face burning red. What was she doing here?
Where is Joseph McDonald? What are you doing here? Do you have any idea how rude you're being? I'll have you know that I am a manager. I have a responsibility to my business, not to some pithy family get-together.
This is a funeral. Please have some respect.
I'm not leaving until I speak with Joseph McDonald. Joseph, you don't have to go. We can just call the police.
The funeral was already a spectacle. I can't imagine how letting it get worse would do anyone any favors. I sighed, shook my head, and then stood up. All of my relatives and family friends were glaring at my boss, and even though there was a heavy weight of guilt in my stomach, I felt better knowing that they weren't blaming me for her hateful behavior. This intrusion is highly unusual, as most people have the common decency to not break into a funeral for a chit-chat. But how about we continue on with things? I left the funeral hall to the sound of the piano striking up a slow, mournful tune, and voices suddenly joining in. The doors closed behind us, blocking out the sound of the singing, and then we were alone in the red-carpeted hallway. I couldn't hold back my shock and anger anymore. Do you have any idea how many lines you're crossing by being here? This is my grandmother's funeral. We both know I asked for permission. We both know you said yes. So, you can either leave or I'll call the police and have them escort you off the property. She gaped at me, and I waited for her to say something, but she didn't, so I left her alone and headed back inside. I had only just sat back down for 1 minute when she burst back into the room and marched to the front, knocking over a photo of my grandmother, and not even pausing when it smashed on the ground. Everyone stared, open-mouthed at my boss, and I felt as though I were going to be sick. "What are you doing?"
You won't come to work because of the funeral, so I'll make sure there is no funeral until you leave.
I was about to stand up. I didn't want my grandmother's funeral to be ruined because of me, but then my aunt grabbed my wrist and fixed me to the seat.
You will do no such thing. You've been warned already, so I'm calling the police. See if I care. I'm the boss of a store and I need my workers. They have jobs. They'll understand. And if I say that Joseph needs to be at work, then he does. That's my right.
I was astounded. I understood that they took their job seriously, but to think that she had the right to call me out of a funeral? To believe that the police would support her choice because of her position as a boss in a cafe? You're delusional.
You're delusional if you think you're going to keep your job after today. You're going to have to beg on bended knee for it back, and you'll be lucky if you get anything close to your current wage. And I know all the business owners in the area, so I know you won't be able to get another job. You need me.
Just leave before this gets worse. If she refuses to leave, we will continue to have the funeral around her. It's a bit unusual, but your grandmother insisted on having her will read immediately. The priest pulled out a big A4 envelope and had a solicitor join him on stage. Together, they started to read through the will. And to my oldest and hardest working grandchild, I grant my familial home and all of my stocks that I was given when I was 15 for a small mechanics business. I believe it has some worth now. The solicitor handed me the deed to the house and the details of the stocks. I choked. The stocks were for one of the biggest companies in the world. They were worth millions. However, included among them were stocks in the very company that I worked for. Not only that, but they would give me a controlling share of the company. Suddenly, I went from a low-level employee to essentially the owner of the company. Congratulations, boss, you've hijacked your last funeral. No more power trips for you. I couldn't believe just how quickly this had turned around, and I made sure to show her why I was so happy. The look on her face when she realized what I was showing her was priceless. 1 minute she was threatening my livelihood, and the next, I was in control of her employment. Suddenly, the police burst through the doors, and they ran up to my ex-boss. She tried to evade their attempts to catch her, but my family helped the police and they were able to catch and arrest her on the spot. They stopped to talk with the priest, but with a nod and a jerk of her arms, they escorted my boss out of the funeral hall to the cheer of everyone in attendance. I think that'll be the last I see of her for a while. Everyone laughed, but soon the funeral went on, and we told many stories of her life. Eventually, the funeral came to an end, and we all went to the wake and partied in my grandmother's name. A week later, I went to the prison to visit my ex-boss, who was still in jail. No one had posted her bail, and she was being held on charges of being a nuisance to the public and evading arrest. She had no friends because of her personality, and so she was alone.
What are you doing here?
I came to offer you the chance to apologize. You do understand how absolutely insane what you did was, right?
Surely you're joking. You're to blame for what happened, not me.
That's a shame. Especially since with my inheritance, I can choose whether or not you will still have a job or not, and honestly, considering how you behave both at work and in this situation, honestly, I wouldn't let you keep your job even if you weren't going to prison. And for a long time too, by the sounds of it.
Prison for what?
Trespassing, causing a disturbance, and after looking over the finances at work. There are some discrepancies in the accounts that you control. So much so that I had to report them to the police. All you had to do was apologize, and I would have forgiven you. And instead of just being fired, you would have avoided going to prison. But not you are both going to prison and being fired. Maybe your time in prison will help you to see the error of your ways, but I won't hold my breath. I was ready to feel bad for you, but you're just a spiteful old witch who doesn't care about people's feelings. Your concern is solely whether people find you important or not. But now you don't have to worry. No one will ever think you're important again. And then I left and went to my job as the owner of the cafe.
Hi there. My name is Sharon. I've never considered myself to be a lucky person, I've had a very complicated upbringing. Let me tell you what happened so that you can have a better understanding of what I mean. When I was very young, my dad abandoned my mom and left her to raise my brother Martin and me all by herself. He was there one day and the next. He emptied out their bank accounts and then just disappeared. He didn't even leave her with anything other than crippling debt. And sadly, the stress from all that debt combined with the fact that my father had always been the breadwinner of the house sent my mom into a depression which eventually caused her to commit suicide. The years afterwards weren't easy, but my brother stepped up and did a lot of hard work. Now I live with my brother Martin, who is my legal guardian. He dropped out of high school, so it wasn't easy for him to find a good job. But he worked tirelessly day and night to provide for me. There were even times where he worked more than one job just so that we could live comfortable lives. When I was old enough, I did manage to find a college that would accept me, but sadly, even though we were incredibly poor, I wasn't able to obtain any scholarships. And so during college, I worked at a restaurant to help pay for my tuition.
You should take out a student loan or get a scholarship. It would be so much easier than working and going to school full-time.
But I didn't want to go into debt like my parents. My mom committed suicide because of her debt. And I was worried that the same would happen to me. After a long talk, I convinced him that I knew what I was doing and that I had a plan to make things work. Years later, I am now married to my husband, Tate. And I work as a childcare worker. I stopped working at the restaurant, but I still hang out with my friends from there from time to time. When I got married to Tate, I told him everything that had happened in my past, and he was very understanding. He had grown up in a loving and nurturing home, and so it was hard for him to fully understand the pain that I had gone through. But he definitely did listen and was proud of how far Martin and I had come, considering the hand that we were dealt. Not long afterwards, we had a son, and although life was still challenging, it was also really good. But 2 years later, Tate's parents and his sister came into the picture. They were such jerks. They called me all kinds of names because I was an orphan and would often make jokes about my current and former job. Not only that, they also came after my brother, calling him all kinds of names because he didn't have a good job and dropped out of school to support me. Martin is my guardian, so not only was I angry that they laughed at me, but I was also angry because they spoke poorly of Martin as well. Tate protected me from them the best he could, but he could only do so much. His parents owned a local grocery shop, and they all went to good universities, always bragging about how successful their business was. But the truth was, it wasn't doing so well, and I knew it. Despite their financial troubles, they spent money freely and bought lavish gifts for themselves, and always asked me for money, making it sound like I was obligated to pay them. Eventually, they had to move in with us after their house caught fire, and they lost their home overnight. They were terrible guests. While I didn't expect them to do most of the work around the house, I did expect them to help out at least a little bit. But they didn't do anything around the house and treated me like a maid. Even though my mother-in-law stayed home all day and didn't move or do anything. Then when I came home from work, she just called me names and complained about how dirty the house was. Whenever I bought stuff for my son and put it in the fridge, they ate it without asking, and they didn't even pay for any of the food that they ate. I had had enough and tried to tell Tate that I was nearing the end of my patience with them. He talked to them for me, but it wasn't enough. They made a little effort for a couple of days, but then went right back to the same routine. One day, while I was returning home from work during winter season, I saw something unbelievable. When I got home, I heard the sounds of people laughing and walked towards where I heard the sounds coming from. In the living room, I saw my mother-in-law and sister-in-law staring through the window. Apparently, they had locked my son outside in the cold weather while it was snowing very hard. My son was freezing and was desperate to come back into the house, but they just kept staring and laughing at the poor boy. I was furious at my husband for allowing this kind of evil behavior to continue to occur in our house. It was bad enough for them to treat me like garbage, but for them to actively abuse my son, that was too much. As far as I was concerned, my husband was enabling them, allowing them to be as toxic as they wanted to be, and I was done with him. If he couldn't be bothered to defend his own family against his cruel parents and sister, then I decided to get a divorce, but that wasn't enough. I decided to get some sweet revenge at the same time, and so I started preparing and forming some plans. My son and I weren't spending another day with those jerks. I went to talk to my brother and his wife and asked them if it was okay for me to leave my son with them for a while until I took care of things back at home. Then I told my husband that my brother and his wife were going on a short vacation with their kids and that I wanted them to take our son. He believed me. Next, I closed my bank account and withdrew all the money, which I then placed in a safe to prevent my husband from accessing it during the divorce proceedings. I also convinced my husband to take out a second mortgage to buy me a car, despite the fact that we were still paying for our house. I was fully aware that this would leave him with 2 mortgages to pay, potentially causing him financial strain. Finally, I hired a good lawyer and went to a detective agency to prepare for the divorce trial. A few weeks later, my in-laws were charged with tax fraud. Apparently, they had been evading taxes in their shop. Then I brought in my lawyer and told him I wanted a divorce. They needed my money, but my bank account was gone, and all my money was hidden somewhere safe. They looked, but they couldn't find any. They wanted to hire someone to look for it, but they couldn't afford it. The house was under Tate's name, and it was already paid for. I paid for some of it too, so I didn't want to give it up, but it was a small price to pay to get them out of my life. Tate started crying and begged me to forgive him, but I left him. I told him he didn't have to pay for damages or child support if he promised me to never show his face in front of me or my son again. I got it all in writing. It took a while, but finally I was done. It felt quite nice. His parents were pissed, but they couldn't do anything about it. And they're still up to their necks in debt even to this very day. They treated me like crap all these years. But finally, I got my revenge. I now live happily with my son far away from ex and my ex-in-laws. Thanks for watching.